Does God care about small places? How can we faithfully serve Christ in a rural context? What is the future of the church in rural America? The Rural Ministry Podcast deals with questions like this and much more in the hopes of bringing practical resources and inspiring stories to help the church flourish in rural communities. Dr. Charlie Cotterman is the Executive Director at the Center for Rural Ministry, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Grove City College, and the pastor of a rural church in Oil City, Pennsylvania. Join the conversation as we journey into the good things God is doing in small places. All right, well, welcome to another episode of the Rural Ministry Podcast, where we talk about the unique challenges and joys of living and doing ministry in rural places. I'm your host, Garrett Heath, Director of Media and Communications at the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City College, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Charlie Cotterman. Charlie's the Executive Director at the Center for Rural Ministry, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Grove City College, and the pastor of Oil City Vineyard Church in Oil City, Pennsylvania. So in our last episode, we covered the biggest challenges of doing ministry in small places. You know, the slow internet, the long drives, the lack of resources, and the potluck dinners where everyone seems to bring the same Jell-O salad. Actually, that didn't come up somehow, but maybe it should have. But what if there's more to it? What if the very things that seem like challenges are actually the circumstances that make rural ministry so deeply meaningful? Today, we're getting to the heart of what makes life and ministry in small places not just bearable, but truly exceptional. We'll explore the hidden blessings, the profound connections, and the surprising resilience found in these communities. So grab a cup of coffee and join us as we ask the question, what makes rural worth it? So Charlie, what makes rural worth it?
Well, it's a big question. But I'll tell you, so we're just coming off of our 2025 Center for Rural Ministry annual conference, and I feel like the whole weekend was hearing about what makes rural worth it. And it was in the stories, it was in like scripture, and listening to people like Bill Sokolsky just talk about, you know, how the prophet Isaiah called the Israelites to like pay attention to what God's doing in their souls and not to like all the tools that they could assemble or the horses, as Bill put it. You know, where Steve McVeigh just talking about, it's not about even just growing your rural church big. Sometimes we think if we just grew a rural church big, we'd have it all together. But the value was just seeing people sold out to Jesus. And I think it all worth in the church, all worth in our Christian lives, it really comes back to being sold out to Jesus because he is worth it all. And so when we talk about what makes rural worth it today, I think we always want to put it under that umbrella that, you know, it's about loving Jesus. And I encourage folks, if you missed the conference, there's going to be some videos, there's going to be some materials from it online. I encourage you to check those out. And we even, props to Garrett, premiered one of his new videos, The Garage with Mark Santel and their car repair ministry. And it was amazing. So you want to check that out too if you haven't seen it. It might inspire. I'm praying it inspires many, many more car repair ministries and churches in rural places.
I hope so too. I mean, I do want to say that, the conference is just really an amazing experience, like especially recognizing the fact that rural ministry can be so isolating sometimes. You feel often like you're all alone in these places, but, there's one kind of oasis weekend, at least of the year, where, you develop some camaraderie, relationships around this that hopefully helps people, springboard into, the coming year.
Absolutely. Totally agree. So what makes rural worth it? Well, I think the first thing we have to talk about when we're talking about, when you talk about worth it, you're talking about value. What makes it valuable? What makes it something that you would invest in? What makes it worth giving your life to potentially, right? For some people, this is a lifelong calling. For others, it's a season. But I think the first thing we have to say, and this is for all Christians, not just rural pastors, is that kingdom values are different, right? It's an upside down kingdom. It's a mustard seed kingdom. And so as we think about the parables, we see that in many of Jesus's parables, value and worth come in surprising ways and unforeseen places. And I think that's one of the things that gets me so excited about rural ministry and small place ministry is that it's kind of not where the world's looking for it. So my natural kind of like watching Jesus, watching what the kingdom is like, I'm like, maybe that's where we should, if that's not where everyone's looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that it kind of eludes our quick take tendencies. You know, our culture, we're like a knee jerk reaction culture. And I say this with a mirror to myself because we all live in it. It's easy for me to do that too. But I think you can't judge the value of things in the kingdom on surface level. It's not all about professionalism or, show, lights and stage, I think it's about things like faithfulness and humility and obedience and love. And those things don't always show up right away. In fact, they can be feigned for a season, but it's over time. And I think that's the cool thing about rural ministry is people get to watch, like pretty close, So when I'm calling a doctor's office, this may or may not have happened, and get frustrated because I can't get in with the receptionist, I'll probably see that receptionist. And so it's like God just puts his finger on, like, faithfulness, humility, love in the little things. And that's
true. The little things matter, I guess, in little places, right? More so sometimes than in big places. And I think you hit the nail on the head too about just having a different kind of standard of value, right, in the kingdom versus in the world. And we kind of jested about this in our conversations about the episode, but even how our title was maybe even a bit misleading right on this front. Like, what is worth in the kingdom versus worth in the world? Like, it doesn't always make a whole lot of sense. Like, well, why would you want to pastor a rural church?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think the whole conversation just is really necessary out of the gate, right? This is kingdom worth, not the worth of the world and its values, right?
Absolutely. And honestly, that's not just a rural ministry conversation.
Well, it shouldn't be. Yeah.
Christian conversation.
That's right.
Following Jesus, how do we determine where value is, and how do we determine what we're going to invest in and what we give our lives to,
And the advantage maybe being in a rural place is that you can't get away with not having it, right? Over time, it will show itself. You can't get away with certain things.
I think there's a lot more opportunity for accountability because you're not as anonymous. And so, like, literally, how do you treat the server? How do you treat the receptionist? All this really matters. And none of us are perfect at it. God convicts me. Like, that was a little harsh there, but it's in small communities where your feet are held to the fire, and that's good. That is good for us.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned in your little intro there too about some parables of Jesus, right? Like, I can think of a few off the top of my head that really touch on this. Like,
absolutely. I mean, think about obviously the mustard seed, right? Smallest, and yet God uses it to do really important things. We might not even say that. I mean, it becomes a bush, like birds can roost in it. Yeah, it's not like a city. It's not like a enormous tree, but it's big enough to do some good in the world, right? And it's surprisingly, it does good in the world. Like, it's not what you would expect. That mustard seed principle, I think, is right at the heart of Christianity. That first shall be last, last shall be first. This God of kind of like God saying, what the world values is not necessarily what I value. And Jesus tells us explicitly, right? The first shall be last, the last shall be first. Or like the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, the beggar, right? Like, he flips things. Or, when you talk about value, there's so many parables about finding something lost, or like the treasure in the field. It's like, if you find what God really loves, if you find the heart of the God, if you find the kingdom of God, it's worth nothing else compares. It's worth getting rid of everything else, and so we have to reset our grid. We have to reset how we think about things like return on investment. Like, we are kind of geared in our culture to think of like quick, tangible, practical returns on investment, whereas God's working on an eternal timeline. And the rivers of our lives, we don't always get to see them now. Right. So cost benefit analyses and return on investment, they're just not going to work in the kingdom the same way. Now, I'm not saying we can be flippant and we can just throw money at things or whatever. By the way, there's not that much money to throw in rural
I
places.
was gonna say, yeah.
Right? Like it's not a call to flippancy, but it is a call to say, like, if you've heard God's voice call you to something, keep doing it. Keep being faithful. Keep pursuing obedience. Keep pursuing the kingdom, and trust God with the results. Because it's not the same analysis. And then one thing to point to this, and then we can move on to a couple other things. But I love, if you listen to this podcast, you're going to hear me quote Lewis a lot. I like C.S. Lewis, the Inklings. They're pretty inspiring for me. And if you think about that grand lady or the great lady in Lewis's Great Divorce, where, the kind of central figure sees this like whole entourage coming with this lady leading it. And he's like, is it? And you're led to believe he's thinking it's Mary, right? Like this grand figure. And his kind of tour guide it says, oh, no, this is just some woman that lived at this like unknown address, but she just loved the people God brought to her. And look, God is actually highlighting her life the way that people didn't see, but God saw. And so I think those are the kind of stories we need to be telling in small places, that like God sees differently.
Yep. No, I agree. I mean, and these are matters primarily of faith too, right? And that can be a difficult thing in the culture that we live in, right? Like, I think we all deal with this, at least I do. Anytime I'm kind of ready to jump in, like I hesitate to like put both feet in sometimes. You're like, well, what if this doesn't work out? Because we don't always see these results, right? Like, in the same way that we might see them in a business model, right? So,
like the farmer.
I mean, faith just plays a huge role here. Like, you got to be willing to walk into this, right?
Mm-hmm. And honestly, that's what we see in Scripture. I mean, if you think about some hinge moments in Scripture, one for me, I always come back to as a pastor and even in my own Christian life. And as I think about mission, one of the major hinge moments in Scripture is Genesis 12, where God takes this one man and his family, seemingly pretty obscure, right? And says, I'm going to bless you. And guess what? Because I bless you, you're going to be a blessing. And that's just, by the way, no matter where you're at, that's a key kingdom principle, blessed to be a blessing, right? So Abraham gets called, and God says, I'm going to bless you to be a blessing. In you, the nations of the earth will be blessed. But it's one person and one family, and they don't even seem like they have it all together. I mean, Abraham, his track record, I mean, he's telling Pharaoh his wife is his sister, and this happens more than once, and like their track record is not perfect. And by the way, they can't have kids either. But God says, I'm going to use this one small family, the particular for the universal. I think in a small place, we have to hold on to that. You just don't know what God can do in you, through you. And I'm not just talking today or tomorrow or 10 years from now. I'm talking eternity. Abraham really couldn't see all those genealogies we have in the New Testament that trace Jesus back to Abraham. He couldn't conceive of that, but look what happened.
Yeah, I feel like he barely understood any of this at all. I mean, he's coming as pagan culture. Like, who is this God? I mean, there's so many variables there that, like, I mean, he's at such a disadvantage even compared to us, right? And yet God uses that small amount of faithfulness.
What he understood was God said go. And he went. And that verse was maybe Genesis 12:5, and Abraham went. Those words.
Yep. And that's why too, it's not always intentions that matter. It's actual actions. Right. That's what I love about that verse, Abraham went, right? We actually have to take the steps or it doesn't count.
Absolutely. That idea in 1 John, if we love God, we'll obey his commandments and his commandments won't be burdensome. Well, if you love God and God says, I've called you to this small place, you know that you love him because you obey that commandment and it's not burdensome. Like, it's a good litmus test. I'm not saying an easy one, but it is a good one. And sometimes we just have to hold up the mirror and say, God, I know I say I love you. I think I love you, but you've asked me to do this and I don't want to do it. It is a burden. Help me love you more.
Yeah.
The other thing I'll say, jumping ahead to kind of another hinge passage in scripture, because I think these hinge passages where things change, where there's a big turning point, really, for me at least, this is like how I think about God's story in scripture, where I think about the hinge passages and when God does something really significant. Obviously, the incarnation is a major hinge passage in scripture. And what do we see in the incarnation? There is no marketer anywhere that would have encouraged Jesus to go about. Now some people say, oh yeah, it makes sense. But like before Jesus did it and changed the world through it, who was saying like pick 12 people who are kind of like, on varying levels of social status. Most of them are kind of uneducated fishermen, and then pick 3 of those and you're going to change the world, and send them out by twos in the small thing. Like who would have said that? The only reason that even comes up today is because Jesus did it so successfully. But what's he doing? He's in a small place. We talked about this in another episode. Of course, that can anything good come from Nazareth, the town of 200 or 400. But then if you look at Matthew 35, right, 9:35, he's going through the towns and villages. At least that's how the NIV translates it. Or if you want to translate it, cities and villages, but really there are almost no cities in Galilee. There's like one that people say maybe 2,000 or 4,000, maybe 30, and that's the top. And by the way, that city, we don't have the gospel writers ever telling us Jesus went to it. So I don't even know. He's going through the small towns and the small villages, and he's looking at these people with compassion. They're like a sheep without a shepherd. Steve McVeigh spoke so eloquently about this at our conference. They're like sheep without a shepherd. And he's saying, God, send out, people, harvesters, for this. And so we see Jesus having eyes to see small places and the needs of small places, and saying, pray for this, pray that God would meet these needs. So there's a lot in scripture about God having compassion and having an eye for the kind of small overlooked places and people.
Yeah. I thought, I was at the conference as well. I thought Steve just did a great job of like showcasing how Jesus viewed all of these challenges, like what we might think is overwhelming need, right? That we could never meet, like how he always viewed these as opportunities, not as challenges, but as opportunities to, show compassion, show love, bring the kingdom into these places, right? As if these are actually the gateways to the kingdom, know? And I think that segues into, something else I'd like to talk about here, because last time we talked about like the unique challenges of rural ministry. Like I think there are some very specific and very unique opportunities as well that come along with rural ministry. Like, what do you think there? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm 100% in on that there's, there are unique opportunities in small places. And like you said, and kind of like Steve said, and by the way, just a side note, if you want to check out that video, we did record that talk of Steve, so it'll be coming out soon.
We did. I'm currently editing it not as we speak, but I was a half an hour ago, and I will be a half an hour from now. So.
Listeners out there, you need to know Garrett is like up to his shoulders in editing right now from the conference. So we're just lucky to have him on this podcast right now. But I think you're right that there is an idea that and I think it actually, we see it in scripture and maybe we even see it in Romans 8, honestly, where God works in all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. It doesn't mean God brings all things, but whatever happens to us, God is so good that he can work in it for good, for his redemptive purposes. That's how good God is. And so when we think about last episode, we talked about the challenges in rural ministry. Like God can use those challenges to bring about some really good things. And I think some of the opportunities we're going to talk about actually come from some of the challenges, and the opportunities are there because of the challenges. So for instance, I think one of the things that's really exciting for me, and this has been exciting throughout my entire pastorate, and it's exciting for me as a college professor, and it's exciting for me as someone who cares about small communities, is what I see young leaders doing in small communities. And it's kind of because of two challenges. So a challenge, like the baby boomer generation is like aging out. They're selling their businesses. They're kind of moving out of key positions. So there's a challenge of kind of like an aging population. And there's a challenge in rural communities of like we're not as young as we used to be. Some of our college kids don't come back. There are some openings. But into those gaps, there is an enormous opportunity for young leaders who do want to come back. And so I have just seen, whether it's church or business, in small places, one of the major opportunities is for younger leaders to actually be able to serve sooner and in kind of more expansive roles. Right. So, for instance, in our little church, we hired an associate pastor, full-time associate pastor, because I'm bivocational. I'm out at Grove City most of the time. And I told him, you could go to a big church and you would be over one little bit of ministry. He had actually come from a big church where he was like the photographer and video guy. And I'm like, you could do that at a big church. You could be over youth. But if you come to this church in this small town, you will get to do it all. Like you will.
That's right.
Orbed ministry preparation a couple of years and then see what God does after that, and that's not just in the church. That's in like business. That's in like local politics. That's in so many things. Young people, young leaders, there's an opportunity, and honestly, as pastors, whether you're younger or older, lean into that. You might not have as many young people as a college town or as a suburban or urban place, but there are going to be some, and there are some will be leaders. Lean into those because they can do amazing things.
I think too. There's an opportunity in rural churches to, even in my experience, just to like naturally use your God-given gifts, right, in ways that maybe you wouldn't get to use in a larger church. Like organic ministry is a thing at the local level. I think,
Absolutely.
We're comprised of real people with real skills. So it's just a great chance to use whatever skills you have, right? Because they're needed, they're necessary in your community.
Well, and I would say to that kind of small communities, and I don't mean this in like a stepping stone way, so don't hear me say that, but they are really great learning environments. And I'm saying some of these people can learn there and get better and better and stay there and use their gifts, right? But
that's it. There's an avenue for you to like, hone your skills at an earlier age and get even better perhaps at like what you would do in a larger place, but in a smaller place, you can get better at that sooner and maybe make a bigger impact even, right?
Absolutely. 100%, and that's one of the reasons why I'll just put in a little plug for one of our programs that we do at the Center for Rural Ministry, Plowshare, where we connect students to local churches, because in every college town, there's like a handful of churches and they're great and they get like 50, 100 students. But then they're just outside of that periphery. There's like these smaller churches where no students ever go. They may not even know they exist. They might not have transportation. And so we kind of facilitate those partnerships and we give a little gas money if it's a little further out to just take away that cost for students. But we do it because we think if like 3 or 4 students, a carload of students show up in this small church 20 minutes away with no one in their 20s, which is a reality. They not only lower the age of that church by maybe a decade by their presence, the average age, but like they get to know the church knows them, there's accountability, but also they get to serve. They get to use their gifts. If there's 50 or 100 college students at a church and you're like guitar player 7, like you're not going to get to play, but if you want to get better, I mean, you've witnessed this over the years, Garrett, like I would have been like guitar player 5, but like over the years, the church, small rural churches gave me a chance to keep playing. And now I might've moved up to guitar player 3. I'm not even sure.
How scary is that place, when you're guitar player 7, or you should be, and on all of a sudden, you get that call. It's like, well, next week, I think you're the only guy around.
Right.
There is nothing like that, that pressure, right? To be thrust into service. But it's good for you, right? You look back at these moments and, it sharpens you, right?
That's right. Let's move on to another opportunity. And I think this is one that's really significant in small places. And it's the opportunity to change the culture in a place. There's been so much talk about changing the world and changing the culture. I'm almost like have a natural aversion to it. But then again, like, honestly, we are praying that literally the prayer most Christians pray around the world is that the culture would change. Let your kingdom come and your will be done on earth as in heaven. Like that's a prayer that cultural everything, like laws, culture, everything changes to represent what's true in heaven. So how do we do that in small places? The thing about it is, if you're in a town of like 1,200, like the one we grew up in, and you're a church of 150, I mean, think about the percentage of that town that's hearing the gospel, that can be motivated to impact the town, showing up at sporting events, showing up at parades, showing up at things. Like, you can change things actually a lot easier. You might know the mayor, you might know the city council, in a big place, it is so much harder to make those connections, so much harder to impact like the way things run in a way that like honors the value of a person and thinks about kingdom values, So there's something about that in a small place.
Yeah, I was going to say, it wasn't, there was somebody at the conference, I think it was Mark Santel. Actually, he was talking about a parade, I think, or was that, I'm trying to remember if that was Mark or who that was.
Yeah, we had a couple people at the conference talking about this reality, because I think rural pastors sense it. And some are really articulate at talking about it. Mark Santel being one. He talked about OPEs, other people's events, and showing up at those, which I love that idea. I'm just going to use that.
I think it was Michael Hoole who was maybe talking about the parade. Yeah.
And Michael talked about the parade. And then there was, I think Michael was referencing another one of the pastors that was there, had used this example. Like 17 years ago, they thought, how can we contribute to our town's annual parade? Because most small towns have these things, right? These other people's events, OPEs. And, I've done this, like I've been scratched my head. What can our church do to be out there with the community? And like ours is Oil Heritage. And so we give away water bottles and we do these things. Well, this church said, there's 4 churches giving away water bottles on the parade route. Maybe we should do something else. How can we serve the town? And they came with the idea of actually picking up garbage after the parade. And at first, you can imagine this is one of those things, you send the sign up out in your church and like it comes back with like one name, the person that signs up for everything, and like no one else wants to pick up garbage. But in this case, like 4 people did it, and they followed the parade, and all the crushed Tootsie Rolls and the little lollipops that are sticky, and
Oh yeah, they just melt in the summer heat. They get ran over by tires and melt all over the.
Really bad. So they do this. Well, they do it for 17 straight years. Think about that. In year 17, they have over 50 people from their church helping. And he says, we've changed the culture. So now when we get to people on the parade route, when we have our garbage bags out, instead of us reaching down and picking up their garbage, most people are saying, oh, here's my garbage. They pick it up. They put it in the garbage bag. They're changing the way that town values even its built environment.
Well, and I think such a beautiful thing about that mentality is it hits on some of the parables we were talking about earlier, right? Like worth and value in the kingdom and how we change things. Like, it's not a top-down way to like influence the culture. It's not a culture war, right, that you're waging on your town. You're actually serving from the bottom up in this mustard seed kind of way, like leaven in a bread, right? Like these are kingdom values, right, when we operate this way and support our communities from the bottom up. I mean, I think that can't be overlooked, right?
Yeah, 100%. I want to move on to one more and we don't have much time left, so just one more for the sake of time. And that's this idea of that I keep coming back to. I mean, one of the things in our technological society that I always think about is like, and it's kind of ironic because sometimes you think the church should help us be less human, but no, in fact, God made us as humans, so he must want us to be human, just humans under the cross.
Good point.
We're not trying to be less human. We're just trying to be more in line with Jesus as finite humans.
As the true human. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. 100%. And so I think rural ministry, all ministry can do this. I mean, most of these things are possible anywhere, but there's certain ways in which rural contexts make it a little bit easier. It's like it's a benefit, or at least it could be. And so I think there's a chance to be a real person. I know we talked about this kind of interconnected life. And I know it's almost a stereotype that rural places are slower. And in some ways they really are, though. Like the pace of life is just a little different. It's more relational than kind of transactional. It's more relational than goal-oriented. I mean, of course, we still have goals. I'm a pretty goal-oriented person myself. But like, there's ways to be a real human and to slow down because we have to, because people know if you value them or not, and people see you. It's not like you can value them at church on Sunday and then not value them through the week in a small place. Like be this kind of like leader who's just like commanding things through the week and then show up and seem super helpful on Sunday, because they're going to sniff that out.
Yep.
And let me give you a couple examples. So, because believe me, and people listening that know me know, like, in no way am I perfect, right? And take the pastor off the platform and off the podium, right? So, like, I see this all the time. I literally just had this happen last night. And then a couple weeks ago, these two stories had happened at church, and one was last night in a text. So a month ago at church, I'm walking in, and someone that lives in the neighborhood I live in said, "I'm just glad to know that you speed like I do." And I'm like, "What?" It's like, I you one day down this road, and you go 10 miles over the speed limit there like I do. I'm like, "Oh man." I'm like, "Well, I'm sorry, but yeah, you got
It
me
was
up."
meant as a compliment, though.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it was meant to do to me right before I preach the sermon. That's how they always come, by the way. But then last night I get a text from someone in the church, and they're like, "Your driver's side headlights out." Like, they had seen me on the road, and then he says, "Let me know if you need help fixing it." Literally.
Wow.
This came last night, and I was like, you know what? That is living in a small community. You can't get away from your foibles, but you can't get away from people that also see your need and they want to enter in. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, even the fact that people had the time to notice.
Yeah, man, we have more we could say. I thought.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stories on that front.
Yeah, I thought I was going to get into this great little book about the slowness of rural life. I'm just going to put this out there. You got to save that. We're going to save that. We'll talk more about that later, because there's so much more we can say. But I think for today we have said enough. Just know.
And see, that actually was going to be my favorite part of the show. That's like my favorite reference. So, well, I guess we'll save it for later.
That's right. I did it for you, so you'll keep coming back as our producer and as my friend and a conversation partner.
Well,
because
maybe it'll be in the next show
by myself.
All right, and that's a wrap for this week's episode. We hope our conversation has provided you with encouragement, insight, and maybe even a practical idea for your own ministry context. Rural Ministry Podcast is part of the good work being done at the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City College. If you found this podcast helpful, there are a few free things you can do to help us out. First, you can share this episode with a friend or colleague you think might benefit from it. Second, you can leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. It helps more people discover our show. And lastly, you can leave us a comment or suggestion on the episode page over at the Center for Rural Ministry YouTube channel. And you can also check out some of our short films that we have over there, like Charlie mentioned. We hope to get some good conversations started over there as well. So thanks again for listening, and you can learn more about our mission by visiting www.ruralministry.org. Have a great week.